Eastern Front. Winter 1942. The temperature has fallen below 30 degrees Celsius. The air is so sharp it bites through the layers of wool and canvas like a blade. A village once called Krasny Yar lies silent beneath a skin of snow. Its roofs sag under the weight of ice. Its chimneys breathe only cold wind. The war has passed through this place once already, and it will return before nightfall. Inside the skeleton of a farmhouse, a lone figure moves. He crawls across the floorboards that crack faintly beneath his elbows. His breath clouds the air. Frost gathers on the rim of his cap. He carries a rifle older than the war itself. A Mosin Nagant, 1891, its stock scarred, its metal dulled by soot and time. He eases the barrel onto a broken windowsill and waits. The village square stretches before him, a white wasteland of churned snow, tire ruts, and black smoke rising from burnt wagons. Through the scope, the glass clears fogs again. Then movement, grey shapes in formation. German infantry, advancing with mechanical precision. The sound of their boots presses against the snow like a drumbeat, rhythmically closing the distance. The sniper exhales once. The sound disappears into the wind. He has no name here, not to history, not to the records that will follow, but to those who will try to cross this village, he will become something else entirely. He studies the column, counting quietly. 1 officer with a map case, 2 radio men, 4 riflemen, a machine gun team pulling their weapon on a sled. They move confidently. The air around them is alive with command and certainty. He adjusts the sight. The crosshair drifts across the officer's chest, then to the man walking beside him, younger, nervous, scanning the rooftops. For a moment the sniper's finger rests still on the trigger. He is not yet ready to reveal himself. Not yet. Timing here is survival. Every heartbeat. He waits, increases his chance of disappearing again. He closes one eye and sees not the man before him, but the line of soldiers that will follow once the first shot is fired, the chain reaction, the panic, the confusion. Far in the distance, engines rumble, German half-tracks moving toward the frozen bridge that cuts across the Volga. If they reach it intact, Soviet defenses will collapse for miles. The sniper blinks once, aligning the sight. His pulse slows. His breath evens. Then the shot cracks. A sound that splits the air like breaking glass. The officer drops instantly, his map spilling open into the snow. The column freezes. Orders are shouted. Soldiers dive behind carts and fences. But the sniper has already vanished, sliding through the wreckage, disappearing like smoke between fractured walls. He reappears behind another window. A second round chambers. Another shot. Another man falls. And then, silence. Snowflakes drift lazily through the shattered frame, landing on his glove. The sniper lowers his rifle and whispers something only he can hear. Perhaps a name. Perhaps a promise. Outside, the Germans begin to retreat, dragging their wounded through the snow. From the tree line, a Soviet radio operator monitoring the sector lifts his head. He hears the echo of the rifle fading across the valley and reports, almost in disbelief, "Enemy advance delayed. Unknown sniper active." That single message marks the birth of a legend. For 3 days, one man will hold back an army and then vanish into the white silence of war. So before we follow the trail of this phantom marksman, subscribe to WW2 FrontTales, where the forgotten stand tall again, where the smallest acts of defiance echo louder than gunfire, and where every story like this one asks the same haunting question. What does it take for one man to change the course of a war? The front line near Stalingrad was collapsing by the hour. What had begun as a steady withdrawal had turned into a desperate scramble for survival. Entire companies vanished in the snow without orders, their positions overrun before their commanders even received the warnings. Krasny Yar sat at the edge of that retreat, a nameless point on a map, yet the only barrier left between the German spearhead and the frozen river crossing. If that bridge fell, the last Soviet supply artery to the city would be severed. Beyond it lay nothing but open steppe and defeat. At dawn, a detachment of 40 men was sent to hold the village. They arrived exhausted, their faces grey with cold and hunger. Most had not slept in 2 days. Ammunition was scarce. Some rifles carried only a handful of cartridges, some none at all. The lieutenant in command, barely 23, studied the ruined streets through a cracked pair of binoculars. "No cover," he muttered. "No reinforcements either." He ordered his men to dig in among the wreckage, behind walls, beneath wagons, inside collapsed barns. The enemy was already visible on the horizon, black dots moving with chilling coordination. German tanks, half-tracks, and infantry columns stretched as far as the eye could see, rolling steadily eastward. Above them, a flight of Stukas traced circles in the frozen air, their engines echoing like distant thunder. The Soviets had no armor, no artillery, no winter gear thick enough to endure the night. The radio worked only intermittently. The batteries froze and died within hours. Still, the order was clear. Hold the bridge, no matter the cost. They built barricades from wagon wheels and farm doors, dragging sandbags from destroyed bunkers. Every man understood what the order meant. They would not be relieved, and they would not be rescued. Among them, near the back of the line, was the quiet Snip. He said little, only checked his weapon, polished the scope glass, and tied a strip of torn linen around the barrel to break the reflection. He had fought since 1941, from Smolensk to the Don. He had seen divisions erased in hours, comrades buried in snow, commanders lost to their own confusion. Yet he remained alive, not through luck, but by discipline. He believed in small, deliberate acts, the kind that made survival measurable, even when the larger war was already lost. That evening, as the sun blared into the clouds, the first shells began to fall. They came in slow, methodical waves, the German prelude to assault. The sky turned orange and black, the air trembling with concussions. The defenders crouched behind their makeshift cover, waiting for the infantry to follow. The sniper watched the bridge through his scope. He could see the snow being churned to mud by the shell fire, the ice cracking beneath the explosions. The radio hissed, then fell silent. The lieutenant tried again, slapping the frozen transmitter. Nothing. When the bombardment ceased, an eerie stillness filled the air. Then, the sound of boots. The German advance had begun. The defenders opened fire, bullets streaking through the smoke. But for every German who fell, 3 more emerged from the haze. The machine gun jammed after the second belt. The assistant gunner cursed and tore at the feed with frozen fingers. The lieutenant shouted for covering fire. A mortar team answered. 1 round, then silence. The tube cracked from the cold. Within 20 minutes, the Soviet line had already begun to falter. Amid the chaos, the sniper held position, his rifle steady on the edge of the window frame. Through the sight, he tracked the enemy commander barking orders near the bridge. He could end him with a single shot, but instinct told him to wait. Firing now would reveal his location too early. So he waited, eyes unblinking, breath shallow, while the world collapsed around him. Behind him, the radio operator muttered, "They're too many." The sniper didn't answer. His gaze never left the scope. The German officer raised his hand, signaling the next wave. The sniper shifted his finger lightly against the trigger. He whispered, almost inaudibly, "1 at a time." And then he fired. The shot echoed down the valley, marking the moment when the fight for Krasny Yar turned from battle into endurance. The defenders would break, the village would burn, but 1 man would remain, and from the ruins he would fight alone. By midnight, the temperature had dropped even further. Frost bloomed across the rifle stocks like white veins. The men no longer spoke, only coughed, shivered, and waited for the inevitable. The first German push came at dawn. From the tree line, armoured vehicles crawled into view, their treads chewing through the crusted snow. Behind them, squads of infantry advanced cautiously, rifles raised, their grey uniforms dissolving into the fog. The Soviets opened fire. Muzzle flashes flickered weakly through the haze, the sound dampened by snow. Bullets hissed into the emptiness, finding little but smoke. A tank shell struck the bell tower. The blast ripped through the square, scattering bricks and snow like shrapnel. The machine gun nest near the fountain was obliterated, 2 men gone before anyone saw the flash. The lieutenant yelled for the flank to hold, but his words vanished beneath the thunder of another detonation. The radio crackled, then went dead again. The line was isolated. The sniper remained calm. He shifted positions between shots, firing sparingly, counting his rounds. Every bullet had to matter. He dropped one soldier carrying a flamethrower, another trying to cut across the street toward the barricades. Each kill bought seconds. No more, no less. The defenders were running low on ammunition. Men scavenged from the fallen, trading rifles when their bolts froze shut. Smoke from burning houses rolled through the village, thick and choking, turning the snow black. A runner stumbled into the sniper's position. "The left flank is gone," he shouted. "They're coming through the orchard." The sniper nodded once, grabbed his satchel of rounds, and moved. He climbed through the wreckage of a collapsed barn, glass crunching under his boots, the air vibrating with the whine of distant artillery. The orchard was barely a grove anymore, twisted trunks, splintered beet, ranches and bodies half buried beneath snowdrifts. He reached the far wall and set up behind a cartwheel. The enemy was visible now, moving in small groups through the trees. Their discipline was terrifying. Every motion calculated, every step measured. The sniper exhaled, adjusted for wind, and fired. One man fell. Another hesitated. The formation wavered. He shifted position instantly, fired again. The illusion of multiple shooters spread confusion among the Germans. They returned fire wildly, shooting at phantom flashes that no longer existed. But even precision had limits. When the next wave arrived, it came with armor. A Panzer IV rolled through the orchard, its turret sweeping left and right. The defenders had nothing that could stop it. The sniper retreated toward the bridge, ducking beneath a wall of smoke. He could hear the lieutenant's voice on the far side, shouting orders that dissolved into chaos. The line had disintegrated. By noon, half the Soviet force was gone. The survivors were falling back toward the riverbank, carrying the wounded, dragging crates of ammunition that barely mattered anymore. The bridge itself trembled under shell fire. A shell struck near the command post. When the smoke cleared, the lieutenant was gone. The survivors were leaderless. The sniper crouched behind the remains of a wagon, scanning the ruins. The air was thick with dust, snow, and flame. The ground shook under the passage of tanks. He had seen this pattern before. Every Soviet position overrun, every defense crushed beneath the weight of precision and firepower. He knew what came next. Collapse, retreat, annihilation. But in that knowledge came clarity. Every battle followed the same pattern, until someone broke it. He crawled into the doorway of a ruined house and reloaded. 6 rounds. He pressed the bolt forward and whispered to himself, not in fear, but in focus. If no one stays, they'll take the bridge. If they take the bridge, they'll take the river. And after the river, there's nothing. The sniper looked back once, at the men crossing the ice, at the burning skyline behind them. Then he turned toward the enemy advance, his rifle steady. He was alone now. The rest had retreated across the river, taking the wounded and leaving silence behind. Snow drifted through the shattered roofs. Smoke curled upward from the ruins like ghosts leaving the earth. He adjusted his position one last time, found a sightline through a cracked window, and waited for movement. The defense of Krasny Yar had failed. But from that failure, one man would begin his own war. For the first time that day, the battlefield fell quiet. The smoke thinned, and the last echo of gunfire faded into the forest. Only the crackle of burning timber remained, a low, steady hum beneath the wind. The sniper sat with his back against a wall, breathing through a scarf blackened by soot. His hands trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. Every muscle burned from hours of crawling, aiming, retreating. The air smelled of ash and frozen blood. Through the ruins he could see the bridge, now empty. The Soviets were gone. Across the river, shapes moved in the distance, small and scattered, heading east. The battle for Krasny Yar was over, but the Germans hadn't crossed yet. He checked his ammunition pouch. 7 rounds, that was all. He unwrapped a frozen piece of bread, broke it in half, and ate in silence. The wind howled through the roofless house, scattering ash like snowflakes. Then he saw it. Movement near the orchard. A squad of German scouts, cautious and methodical, advancing toward the bridge. They were checking for survivors, clearing the ruins, marking the next crossing point. The sniper lifted his rifle. Through the cracked scope, he could see their faces clearly now. Young, confident, and unaware. He took a slow breath, steadied his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The first scout dropped instantly. The second froze. Confusion spread like a ripple through the line. The sniper shifted position. A second shot rang out. Another soldier collapsed. By the third shot, the Germans were shouting, scattering behind cover. He fired again, striking the man carrying the radio, communication gone, coordination severed. The survivors ducked behind debris, scanning the windows, but there was nothing. No muzzle flash, no silhouette, only smoke, wind, and silence. The sniper waited. He didn't move. He had learned from the morning, to survive meant to vanish. Wishes. One soldier dared to break cover and crawl forward. The sniper let him, then with surgical precision fired once more. The bullet struck clean through the man's helmet. 5 rounds left. The German commander ordered a retreat from the forward edge, calling in artillery to level the area. Within minutes, shells began to fall again, pulverizing what little remained of the town. The sniper ran through basements, ducking through holes blasted in walls, moving like a shadow through firelight. When the barrage stopped, he was gone. For 3 days he remained in the ruins. By night he slept under broken beams. By day he hunted, not for food, but for soldiers. Every time a patrol entered Krasny Yar, they lost men, a scout here, a machine gunner there. No one ever saw the shooter. The Germans began to whisper a name for him, Der Geist, the ghost. He studied their routines, their spacing, their reactions to gunfire. He realized they moved in predictable lines, by habit, by doctrine. It was a flaw he could exploit. He began to reposition between shots, crawling through tunnels, drainage ditches, and half-collapsed trenches. He used broken mirrors from houses to check his angles, frozen glass to watch reflections without exposing himself. Soon, he was no longer reacting. He was anticipating. Every bullet he fired was planned hours in advance. One afternoon, he lured a patrol into an ambush. He left a helmet and rifle near a doorway, the barrel angled outward. From 2 streets away, he watched through his scope as the Germans crept forward, thinking they had cornered him. When they fired at the decoy, he struck from behind. 3 shots, 3 dead. Then silence. He scavenged their rations, cleaned his rifle, and changed position again. The ghost of Krasny Yar was no longer a man in retreat. He was a strategy. At night, when the frost thickened on the windows, he sat by candlelight and recorded each engagement in a notebook he'd taken from a fallen officer. Distances, wind direction, number of shots, enemy response time. He was no longer fighting for survival, he was experimenting. With every day, his accuracy improved. His kill zones expanded. His traps grew subtler. A German sniper was eventually sent to find him, an expert marksman from the 24th Infantry. The duel lasted 2 days. The Ghost fired first, but missed intentionally, testing for reaction. The German took the bait, firing to with the muzzle flash. But there was no flash, only sunlight glinting off a piece of broken glass placed in the window. The Ghost tracked the faint smoke trail from his opponent's shot and fired once. The German rifle fell silent forever. That was the turning point. From then on, German units began to delay entering Krasny Yar. Patrols refused night shifts. Officers requested artillery clearance before advancing through the ruins. The Soviets across the river heard rumors. An unseen shooter holding the line alone. They didn't believe it at first. No one could survive that long. Not in that cold. Not against that firepower. But when reconnaissance units returned days later, they found the bridge still intact. Enemy movement halted. And through the broken windows of the church, they saw something painted on the wall in ash and soot. Still here. The sniper had discovered something new. Not just how to survive, but how to paralyze a superior force using fear, misdirection, and patience. He had turned a ruined village into a fortress built on illusion. His war was no longer about numbers. It was about time. How long one man could delay an army. And he wasn't finished. Dawn crept over the ruins of Krasny Yar like a slow exhale. The sky glowed pale grey, the light cutting through fog and smoke. For 3 nights, the sniper had held his ground alone, unseen and unbroken. But now the Germans were returning, not in scattered patrols, but in force. Columns of infantry advanced through the frost-laden fields, their boots crunching over shattered glass and spent shells. Armoured half-tracks followed behind, their engines growling like beasts in chains. A low hum of aircraft circled above, reconnaissance planes searching for any sign of resistance. The sniper, crouched beneath the beams of a collapsed barn, watched through his scope. His pulse slowed, his breathing steadied. This was no longer a skirmish. It was an organized sweep, a full counter-operation designed to crush whatever haunted this place. From the far end of the street, artillery began to thunder. Mortars shattered the remaining rooftops. Explosions echoed across the frozen river, shaking the bridge. Smoke blanketed the ruins again, but the sniper remained still. He waited until the first wave of soldiers moved into the open. Then, the Ghost struck. His first shot hit the point man square in the chest. The lead scout of the 71st Infantry Regiment. Before his body hit the ground, the second shot had already found the sergeant behind him. The column halted. The sound of orders rose above the gunfire, frantic and uncertain. The sniper relocated instantly, sliding through a hole in the wall into a narrow alleyway. He knew the Germans would trace his previous position. He fired from a new angle. And again, chaos erupted. The Germans retaliated with machine gun bursts that shredded the facade of every visible building. Dust filled the air, blurring lines of sight, but the Ghost had already moved again. From the 3rd floor of a crumbling apartment block, he fired once more. Thus is time targeting the radio operator. The bullet struck through the antenna of the set, killing both communication and the man who carried it. Now the German unit was blind. They had expected a hidden squad, maybe 10, maybe 20 defenders, but there was only one, and he was everywhere. For hours, the standoff continued. The Germans fired at windows, at chimneys, at flickers of movement. Every time they thought they had him cornered, another shot came from somewhere else. At one point, they even called in air support. 2 Stukas swooped low, dropping fragmentation bombs over the ruins. The earth convulsed with thunder. Yet when the smoke cleared, the sniper's rifle cracked again. One shot, precise and deliberate, hitting the pilot of the second aircraft, through the canopy as it banked. The plane spiraled out of sight and crashed in the forest beyond. The German commander froze. He had no explanation. He ordered his men to fall back beyond the bridge perimeter. The sniper used the lull to reposition once more, this time into the church tower, one of the few structures still standing. He climbed through the broken stairwell, every step creaking under the weight of debris. From there, he could see everything: the fields to the west, the shattered town to the east, and the river glinting under thin morning light. He unwrapped a final ration, ate quietly, and prepared his last 5 bullets. Below, the German commander regrouped his men. He ordered tanks forward. If artillery couldn't kill the Ghost, armor would crush him. But the sniper had already calculated for this. He aimed at the fuel truck rolling near the lead panzer. One clean shot. The explosion ignited the street, sending flames leaping across the ruins. German soldiers scattered, screaming through the smoke. He fired again, this time hitting the exposed commander atop the second tank. The man slumped full, ward as the machine rolled into a wall, stalling. Within minutes, the entire convoy was in disarray. For the first time since dawn, the sniper lowered his rifle. His hands ached from the cold. He watched the German line withdraw in confusion, dragging wounded men through fire and rubble. He had no reinforcements, no supply line. And yet, he had stalled a full assault division. That day, Soviet scouts across the river intercepted German radio chatter, the words repeated across frequencies. Krasny Yar remains contested. The shooter is still active. The order to advance was cancelled. The German timetable for that sector, part of the larger southern push towards Stalingrad, was delayed by 72 hours. One man, operating alone, had shifted the rhythm of an entire campaign. Night fell again. The battlefield glowed faintly with embers. The sniper descended from the tower, limping slightly from shrapnel lodged in his leg. He crawled into a basement and sat against the wall, wrapping the wound in a torn scarf. The silence returned, deeper now, like the earth itself was holding its breath. He opened his notebook and recorded the day in careful handwriting. Enemy armor repelled, fuel line destroyed, bridge intact, mission continues. He closed the book and rested his rifle across his knees. For the first time, he allowed himself to exhale, not from relief, but from knowing he had done something impossible. He had proven that courage, patience, and precision could bend the machinery of war. And though he didn't know it yet, reports of the invisible marksman who halted a regiment were already spreading across Soviet lines. The legend of the Ghost of Krasny Yar had begun to move faster than the man himself. By the 4th day, the snow around Krasny Yar had turned grey with ash. The German advance had frozen, not from logistics or weather, but from hesitation. The word Geistschütze, Ghost Marksman, had spread through the 71st Infantry like infection. Men refused to patrol alone. Officers barked orders under their breath, afraid to raise their heads. When helmets flashed in sunlight, they smeared them with soot. The enemy had begun fighting the unseen as much as the Red Army. Across the river, Soviet reconnaissance patrols finally reached the outskirts. What they found stunned them. A village devoid of life, walls riddled with bullet holes, corpses lying where they fell, and a single bridge still intact. They expected to find bodies of their own comrades. Instead, they discovered a trail of shell casings leading from cellar to attic, from house to house, a map of one man's movement carved in brass. In one building, they found a message scratched onto a plank, still breathing. The commander of the reconnaissance unit sent word back to division headquarters. Within days, the tale reached higher command, passed between officers, questioned, then confirmed by the intercepted German transmissions mentioning the sniper who delays the crossing. Soon, field newspapers picked up the story. Krasny Yar's ghost sniper became a headline in the 62nd Army's internal bulletin. It was written anonymously at first, accompanied by a rough sketch of a man in a tattered coat holding a rifle among ruins. No one knew his name. No one had seen his face. But every soldier who read it felt the same chill. If one man could hold a bridge against an army, perhaps they could too. By December 1942, Soviet sniper schools had begun referencing the ghost defense, a case study in urban camouflage, psychological pressure, and mobility between shots. Instructors spoke of the technique as if it were doctrine. Change your firing position with every bullet. Make them believe you are many. Recruits practiced in abandoned warehouses, shifting between vantage points, using reflections and noise to mask their true number. The Ghost's methods, whether by design or discovery, became a tactical philosophy, invisibility as domination. Letters from Stalingrad mention him too. One sniper wrote to his wife, "They say a man in the north fights alone. If he can endure, so can we." The Ghost had become a story that strengthened exhausted men, a myth that made them lift their rifles with steadier hands. Meanwhile, among German ranks, his legend grew darker. Some called him Der Schattenjäger, the shadow hunter. Others believed he was already dead, and the Russians were using his ghost to frighten them. Entire patrols began firing at empty buildings before entering them. Machine gun bursts tore through windows where no sniper waited. Fear consumed ammunition faster than battle. For the first time since the war began, German officers wrote in their reports not only about positions and losses, but about moral fatigue. One entry from January 1943 reads, "The men hesitate at Krasny Yar. They fear the unseen marksman more than artillery." A single man had turned psychology into warfare. On a frigid night near the end of that winter, Soviet scouts finally encountered a figure near the forest edge, moving slowly, wrapped in rags. He carried a Mosin Nagant rifle and limped with every step. They shouted, but the man didn't respond. When they reached him, they found him leaning against a tree, frost covering his beard, his eyes half open. In his pocket was the notebook, the same one filled with meticulous notes, dates, and sketches of firing angles. The last entry read, "Bridge held, enemy delayed. I am finished." He died before sunrise. His notebook was sent to the 62nd Army headquarters, then archived in a field office near Stalingrad. Months later, when Soviet historians reviewed it, they discovered not just battle reports, but tactical insights far ahead of their time, adjustments for wind, counter-sniper predictions, and behavioral analyses of German platoons. One analyst wrote in the margin, "This man turned chaos into mathematics." The ghost of Krasny Yar was no longer a rumor. He was a precedent. By the end of 1943, the Red Army's sniper manuals had evolved. Pages once dedicated to simple marksmanship now included lessons on movement, concealment, and psychological warfare, techniques clearly inspired by Krasny Yar. His legacy became embedded not in medals or parades, but in training doctrines, whispered instructions, and the quiet resolve of those who followed. And though the man's name was lost to war's indifference, his impact survived, in every sniper who moved unseen, in every soldier who learned that patience could defeat firepower. The Germans had called him a ghost to make sense of their fear. The Soviets called him a hero to make sense of their hope. But history would come to call him something simpler, the man who delayed an army. When the snows of 1942 melted into the mud of spring, Krasny Yar ceased to exist. The village that had once clung to the riverbank became little more than a grey scar on the landscape, levelled by artillery, reclaimed by moss and silence. But the bridge still stood, bent, blackened, but unbroken. It had survived because one man refused to leave. Months later, when Soviet forces finally pushed west, engineers crossed that same bridge. They noticed the marks on its frame, bullet holes forming tight clusters, always in pairs, precise and deliberate. No one at the time understood their pattern. Years afterward, an officer recognized them as the distinct groupings of sniper suppression fire. Controlled bursts meant to fix enemy movement. Even in death, his marksmanship told a story. By late 1944, the Red Army had turned the tide. In the aftermath of Stalingrad, the story of the Ghost resurfaced, not as rumor now, but as training doctrine. Sniper instructors in Moscow recited his example to new recruits. He fought without orders. He held without support. He taught us that patience is not retreat. It is power. They studied his notebook, preserved in the archives of the 62nd Army. The pages were stiff with frost damage, the ink blurred by moisture, but the handwriting was sharp and methodical. Coordinates, wind corrections, engagement distances, all recorded with the clarity of an engineer. At the end of the final page was a single line written differently from the rest, pressed deep into the paper as though carved. A rifle is only as steady as the heart behind it. That line was later quoted in the Soviet Sniper Manual of 1945, unattributed, but known among veterans as the Ghost's sentence. After the war, Krasny Yar was never rebuilt. Nature reclaimed the rubble, and the river slowly swallowed the foundations. Yet, every winter, hunters in the region reported he airing faint echoes across the frozen fields, sharp cracks followed by silence. The villagers began to call it the rifle of the Ghost. In 1957, a memorial plaque was quietly placed near the bridge by a group of former 62nd Army veterans. It bore no name, only an inscription, "To the defender who stayed." Over time, the story faded into the archives, overshadowed by larger battles, louder heroes. But within the Soviet Sniper Corps, his legend endured like an unspoken creed. During the Cold War, when Soviet marksmen trained in the forests of the Urals, instructors reminded recruits of the man from Krasny Yar. His tactics, stealth, patience, unpredictability, had shaped generations of sharpshooters who never knew his face. Decades later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, historians reopened the archives of the 62nd Army. Inside one of the sealed boxes, labeled simply Operational Reports. Winter 1942, they found the notebook again. The first half was tactical, detailed accounts of engagements, weather conditions, and shot trajectories. The second half was something else. It contained sketches of the ruined village, a map of streets, landmarks, notes about civilians who once lived there, the blacksmith, the school teacher, the woman who owned the orchard. He had drawn them as if to remember them. On the final page, written faintly in pencil, were 7 words. If no one remembers, the silence wins. The historian who discovered it later wrote that the page felt less like a record, more like a confession. Today, only fragments remain. A damaged rifle stored in a Volgograd museum, a photograph of a frozen bridge, and a myth told in hushed tones by aging veterans. Yet, his influence echoes in every modern sniper doctrine that values patience over aggression and stillness over speed. His lesson outlived him, that sometimes the greatest victories in war are not measured by territory gained, but by time bought, by the few moments of resistance that allow others to survive. He did not live to see the army advance again. He did not witness victory parades or medals, but because he stayed, thousands behind him reached the river alive. And though his real name dissolved into history, his legend endures, not written in books, but etched into the conscience of those who fight and endure in silence. For in the end, it was not glory that drove him, not vengeance, not orders, only the quiet conviction that one life, held steady, could stall the tide. That is how one sniper delayed the Nazi advance. The true story of World War II's Ghost Marksman. The war ended long ago, but stories like his, they never fade. They remind us that courage doesn't always roar across battlefields. Sometimes it breathes quietly, behind a scope, in the ruins, in the moments no one sees. His name is lost, but his stand is not. Because the line he held was more than a bridge. It was a promise that even in the darkest winters, resistance can survive in a single heartbeat. And that heartbeat still echoes across the ice, across the years, whispering through history. Still here. If stories like this move you, subscribe to WW2 FrontTales. More forgotten tales of courage, ingenuity, and endurance await. Because sometimes, the smallest acts change the course of the greatest war.